Danny, is that how you think all Portland people look? Hello and welcome to Dethroning the Warriors, a multi-part series where we talk about the big question looming over this year's NBA playoffs. Who could take down the Golden State Warriors? That's Danny Chau.
It's Justin Verrier.
Today we're going to talk about Portland, a place near and dear to my heart and my facial hair, and also to Danny a little bit.
Love the food there.
Great stuff there. Let's start where we do every episode with how this team was built, and with the Trailblazers, it starts with one word, that is conviction, and $269 million. In the 2014-15 season, the Blazers put together a dark horse contender with a really strong starting five. You had Dame, you had LaMarcus Aldridge, you had Wes Matthews, Nicholas Batum, Robin Lopez, which at that point in a pre-Warriors kind of era was good enough to really make a run for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were kind of a beacon of hope after years of suffering through terrible, like tragic injuries from Greg Oden and Brandon Roy.
But it does get slightly better. Wes Matthews does go down, but they kind of, instead of rebooting and really kind of starting from scratch, they just bring in all these solid guys and just kind of make a go for it. Al-Farouq Aminu, Ed Davis, Mo Harkless brought in the offseason of 2015. They traded for Mason Plumlee, Noah Vonleh. Those didn't go as well. Neither did re-signing Myers Leonard to a big deal or signing Alan Crabb, who eventually had to be traded for luxury tax concerns. Not even playing for the Nets at this point.
And it gets even worse.
It gets worse before it gets better. Evan Turner comes the next offseason for 4 years, $70 million, but at least he's not Chandler Parsons. Silver lining there. They re-signed Nurkic to a bargain deal. That's a good one. But along the way, they kind of just keep things going around the CJ McCollum, Dame Lillard core. Nick Stauskas gets a run earlier this season. You got a Jake Layman, Seth Curry, Rodney Hood, Zach Collins drafted in 2017. These are all just
my guys.
Danny's guys specifically, but guys that augment what they already have. CJ McCollum, importantly, signed to an extension in 2016, and Damian Lillard up for a Supermax extension this summer at the age of 29. It works, hasn't worked really well. The past two playoffs have shown that with these two first round outs at the hands of the Warriors and then the Pelicans in pretty dramatic fashion.
It was just mainly they suffered from a lot of bad luck.
They got put up against two buzzsaws, and the Pelicans just were a really bad matchup. They managed to blitz those two ball handlers and really get it out of their hands, and then you're forced to deal with Nurkic and Aminu, and it didn't go as well. But they've had some success with this core. Danny, take us through some of the ups and downs of leaning into Dame time and also whatever we would call the CJ McCollum part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. After last postseason, we thought, oh, this team's over. They're done. Everyone has a blueprint on how to stop them. And the big buzz during training camp this season was that Terry Stotts thought, hey, instead of staggering my two best players, let's just keep them on the floor together forever. And so that's exactly what he did. Of McCollum's 2,375 minutes, 86.5% of them were spent with Lillard on the floor, which is a huge bump up from last season where he spent 65% of his minutes with Lillard. And so for the most part, most teams would consider this kind of counterintuitive. You actually want to kind of split up your two best creators to make sure that there's going to be elite playmaking on the floor at all times. But that's not necessarily what the Blazers were concerned with, because the Blazers actually have a very deep and very compatible, complementary reserve unit. And so Terry Stotts' idea of keeping those two together is basically, we are going to blitz you on offense in the minutes that we have our two stars together. And our back line, they're going to be fine.
And it's worked out in particular for Evan Turner because he's employed and has something to do with that second unit.
Yeah, it's totally worked. So the Blazers have been fantastic with Lillard on the floor. He's been a legitimate MVP contender, probably in that 3, 4, 5 slot. The Blazers have outscored teams 8 points per 100 possessions when he's on the floor. When he's off the floor, they get outscored by 7.3 per 100, which is a 15-point swing. That's a lot. And Lillard, for how much he's played, that net rating is astronomical, especially given it's the second behind Yusuf Nurkic, who we'll get into a little bit later.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. So how it's happened though is a little bit different from how you normally considered a guy in Lillard's vein. So unlike James Harden, who has basically exponentially increased his three-point attempt rate, Lillard actually backed off a little bit from last year.
Right.
Lillard took 9 threes per game last year. He's dropped down to 8. He's getting to the rim way more than he did in his career. And he's actually finishing at a really good rate, which is something that wasn't always the case throughout, his first 4 years in the league.
Also seems to be backing up with where he's taking these three-pointers.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where he's become truly a Steph-light type player. We've been talking about him, and we've been talking about the Blazers as kind of like a Warriors-light team for so many years now. But when you look at Lillard's attempts from 30 feet out and past that, he's actually taking the same amount as Steph, and he's hitting them at about the same efficiency as well. So if we're just looking at long bombs, he's right there.
Right. It's interesting because we keep trying to forecast who the next Steph Curry is. Lillard is as close to it as possible. Maybe Kemba Walker would be the only other one.
And the big thing with Lillard is that he actually has the frame to kind of sustain, this for a really long time. He's not necessarily the biggest point guard, but he's not the smallest either. He has a 6'2", long arms, strong frame. He can do this for forever.
Right, and so you think that being able to play at the Warriors game would provide some advantages. Danny, take us through how they fared against them this season in particular.
So this was a full series. It was a full 4 games. They split the series. I think the striking thing across the series was just how much Yusuf Nurkic was a plus for the team.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It really is, and I think the entire landscape of this potential series would have changed if he was on the floor. He was facilitating from the post. He was facilitating from the three-point line. He was bullying guys. No one can keep him from the block. And he was such a game changer on both ends of the floor. I mean, in a 7-game series, you'd probably expect the Warriors to find a game plan to slow down this more or less lumbering big man. But in the interim, in those first 2 games, I'm pretty sure Nurkic would have made a huge difference and would have given them a huge boost.
Right, and especially when the drop-off is to a Myers Leonard,
Right.
a Zach Collins, a guy that you love, but is still not as solid.
He's not ready.
Yeah, he's just not ready.
I think one thing to note is that this is kind of calling back to 2017. But to note there is that Nurkic only played 17 minutes in that series. And that could have changed the series. Obviously, the Blazers would not have won, but they probably wouldn't have gotten swept either.
Right. There is a little bit of a curveball there. They don't have Nurkic, but they do have Collins, who, as we said, not ready when it comes to actually playing, but in terms of calling his opponents bad words.
It's incredible, man. Okay, so yeah,
he might be a legend already.
We buried the lead. Zach Collins jawing with Klay Thompson in their final meetup in the season, February 13th, day before Valentine's Day. No love lost between these two.
Yeah.
So I think the play was Zach Collins blocks the shit out of Damian Lee, and then
as one does,
and then later on I think Klay gets called for an offensive foul on a shove. I think Zach Collins probably embellished the flop.
As one does.
They get up and they start jawing, and Zach Collins is just like, "Fuck you, ho."
Allegedly.
I love Zach Collins, the irritant.
Yep.
I love what he might be able to bring as an X factor to a potential playoff series. I don't love that he probably has no shot at getting regular minutes in a series like this.
Yeah, it's a real double-edged sword when your main advantage is calling someone a hoe. So we'll see how that works out, but not having Nurkic in particular, we've been dancing around this, that's clearly the Achilles heel for this team. And if we want to get even broader, it's just defense. This team has not been a good defensive team throughout Damian Lillard's run there. They had some hope last season, didn't really bear out in the playoffs in particular, but 16th overall in the regular season. Nurkic, by far, their best defender on this team. When he was on the floor this year, they played pretty much like the Jazz on defense. When he was off, they played like the Blazers, which might sound counterintuitive, but he really wasn't playing that many minutes. He was only playing about 27 a game, as Danny kind of referred to. He's not like a specialist, but they did pick and choose how they use them. And in 2019, you're going to pick and choose how you're using a center to begin with. He also ended up sitting more than he ended up playing, in part because he missed 10 games at the end of the season because of that gruesome leg injury. In particular, pick and roll defense for this team is atrocious. I think a big part of that is just because of some of the flaws that Dame and CJ have on the defensive end. Now, if there's a silver lining there, it's that the Warriors don't play pick and roll at all, even though that they've been really good at it, especially in the playoffs and the few times that they've had to deploy it. That Steph and KD pick and roll that won, I guess, 4 is kind of a fever dream for blog types and the internet.
It's really just the Occam's razor of basketball plays. It's keeping it as simple as possible and using your 2 best talents on the floor together in harmony. There's nothing that the Blazers can really do if the Warriors actually want to do that.
Right, and now the Warriors run fewer than I think anybody except for the Sixers, and they might even run fewer than them. But I guess the downside for Portland is that the Warriors are just good at pretty much everything else, in particular in transition. The Blazers have been good there, but you're really trying to stop the best offense in history, and and if you're not already good against decent teams, I think you're going to be behind the 8 ball here. And Danny is going to explain specifically how that might come to bear in a series with our favorite segment, Danny's Play Breakdown.
Much of what made the Blazers defense, so compelling this year was exactly what we were talking about. Jusuf Nurkic being on the floor and how he specifically kind of shifted the geometry of the floor just because he was such a big boy. When we talk about pick and roll coverages and it's Kanter who's filling in for him, yes, he also drops back in the pick and roll, but he doesn't really know how to angle his body. Whereas Jusuf Nurkic, when he's dropping back and allowing people to kind of get closer to the rim so that he can protect it, he's angling his body, he's forcing guys into certain lanes. Whereas Kanter's just kind of dropping all the way back and being like, here's the rim, buddy. But yeah, so if we're talking about what the Blazers can do on defense, it's largely what you're gonna hear in every single coach's timeout on an ABC broadcast. You need to have consistent effort. You need to have communication.
You gotta get back, guys.
Yeah, because the Warriors' best shooters, are going to get theirs, and so you just need to be there. And so here's a play that we isolated. It deals with Jusuf Nurkic. So right here, Clay and KD kind of set off-ball screens for each other, kind of like a sliding door situation.
Oh God, CJ, what are you doing, my guy?
But that's the thing. CJ at least makes an effort. He gets caught up with Clay, but he immediately rushes towards KD. But really, Nurkic is making this play. See, Kevon Looney is setting the screen for KD to take this shot, and just by sheer girth, Nurkic is basically pushing Looney back into KD while he's contesting the shot. It's an effective method of defending because Nurkic is Nurkic, but going forward, looking at what the Blazers might need to do, you're looking at Al-Farouq Aminu, you're looking at Zach Collins. They're 2 best defenders who combine size, athleticism, and length.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of hoping that if you're the Blazers, you can kind of keep up with them and attract me. If you go Collins, Aminu, then maybe all of a sudden you score enough points where the Warriors have to score more and things go from there, but you actually have to stop the Warriors, and those guys are not stopping anybody.
Yeah, and Lillard will have to hit every single one of his 30-feet bombs. Yeah, he has to stretch the court pretty much to the logo, which he has been doing against the Thunder, so there is some hope there. All right, let's finish this off here with our second favorite segment, I guess, our Warriors scale. How worried the Warriors should be about the Portland Trail Blazers on a scale from 1 to 10. 10 being the most worried, 1 being the least worried. Danny, how worried should the Warriors be? I got this at a 1.
Oof, that's rough.
I just don't think the Blazers have enough counters to what the Warriors can do, and honestly, the front court matchups are going to be brutal. Kanter has kind of gotten the perfect run up until now. And whoever he plays in the second round, it'll mostly be more along the lines of what's happening in this first round.
Yeah, his magic is already starting to run out because you're seeing way more Myers Leonard in this first round series against the Thunder. I mean, let's talk, who guards Kevin Durant on the Blazers? Is it Aminu? Probably.
You put Aminu on him, you put Harkless on him, you put as many bodies on him as possible.
Who guards Steph Curry? It's Damian Lillard and CJ? You see where I'm going here? Who guards Klay Thompson? I guess it's Mo Harkless. I mean, I like Mo Harkless. He has a nice headband. There's just not a lot there. I'm going to go a little bit more optimistic. I'm going to say a 2, if only because I do think the Blazers can put up a lot of points. I wonder how long that will take them. But, I mean, if we're saying a lot of these teams can only get one game on the Warriors anyway.
Right.
I mean, that's still something. I think they're just as good as the Sixers.
They did win 2 in the regular season.
There you go. There's your hope. All right, that's it for us. Thank you for joining us. For Danny, I am Justin. We'll see you next time.